So when you were born, you were given this spark of life. And that spark vitalizes you until your days on this planet are over. And your job, your role in between time is to use that human spirit to express yourself and also to give back to your community. That is a quote from one of my all-time favorite movies, Phenomenon, with John Travolta. Has anybody seen that movie? It's very old. If you haven't seen it, it's not blatantly spiritual, but has a very spiritual connotations, and I highly recommend it. So if you have a chance to see it, Phenomenon, it's really, really good. John Travolta plays a character by the name of George Malley. And George Malley, his story really kind of reminds us of the power of the human spirit. But this quote, I think, just reminds us that ordinary men possess extraordinary potential. So that all of us came here with that spark of life that only you have to contribute, correct? Some of you are aware of what it is. Some of you are still in the evolutionary process of trying to figure out what that looks like. But everyone has got it. So how many times in your life have you walked away from kind of a nerve-wracking situation just wishing you could have a do-over? Have you ever done that? It could have been a job interview or a performance or maybe even just a really difficult conversation. And so that's not uncommon for us because sometimes the very moments that require us to be most genuine and most powerful leave us feeling kind of inauthentic and powerless. And so life's biggest hassles sometimes and the struggles that we have to manage, we step into with dread and we execute with anxiety and we leave there with regret. And so the conversation that we're going to have today is that I've noticed that in my coaching work and certainly in my own experience, I've been in the Unity movement since I was 11 years old. So, 20 years. You're not supposed to laugh at that, by the way. A really, really long time. But in my experience there, what I've noticed is there's a handful of what I would call essential practices that really help us to navigate some of the day-to-day stuff that we have to navigate through. So I'd love to be able to share those with you. Would you like to know what they are? Yes. Okay. Number one. These are, by the way, these are not rocket science. But it's not so much about, it's not that we don't know how to act, we don't act on what we know. Isn't that true? There's nothing new under the sun, right? You've seen it all, we've heard it all. By the time you get to be adult people, there's really nothing new. But what we have to do, our role within the ministry, is to remind people who they are. Because we get up every day sometimes and we forget. Number one is to be present. To be present. Because think about that. Matthew Killingsworth did a study on cognitive mind wandering recently. I saw it on a TED Talk. And when he talks about cognitive mind wandering, they did a study. And what they determined, 350,000 people, all different demographics. And what they determined is that in that study, 55% of the time, you are thinking about something other than what you're doing. 55% of the time. Do you believe that? That's insane. So think about that when you're sitting in a meeting or, God forbid, driving your car. I mean, how many times do you get somewhere you're like, I don't even know how I got here. the car just drove here, right? So just being present. Well, but I will say that cognitive mind wandering in and of itself, your mind wandering is not necessarily a bad thing. Because mind wandering sometimes leads us to things like creativity, right? And innovation and all of the things that grow us outside the walls of our head. But here's the rub. The second half of that study, what they determined, and this is the part that really got to me, is that within 3 to 5 minutes after mind wandering, people were infinitely, substantially less happy than they were before their mind wandered. So, mind wandering is only useful if you're thinking about something better than what you're doing. When our mind is wandering, are we thinking about things like rainbows and unicorns and stuff like that? What are we thinking about? Worry, stress. Where am I going to get the money to pay for this? My kid is struggling in school. Maybe a health challenge that's pervasive. But we start to process things through our head, and we're constantly, consistently thinking about things other than what we're doing, that are worse, actually, than what we're doing. In fact, Brené Brown goes as far as to say that we actually dress rehearse tragedy and disappointment. Isn't that interesting? It's almost like things are a little too good right now. There's got to be something lurking around the corner. So we're always looking for the other shoe to drop. So what happens is, even in our moments of high consciousness and prosperity and happiness and joy, we're actually thinking about when it's going to be over. Isn't that twisted? But we do it 55% of the time, so it wouldn't be that bad. But when you think about how often our mind is wandering, that's pretty dangerous when you think about it. So there's a very strong relationship between your mind wandering now and unhappiness in your life. One of the 5 core basic unity principles I talked about in the meditation is that we create our life through our thinking, right? Which means that every thought that you have is like planning a future event. If you're worrying, you're planning. If you're appreciating, you're planning. So you're always planning a future event, and we know that to be true. This is basic law of attraction stuff, isn't it? So we've all heard this before. But it's really interesting. It's kind of a troubling pattern. And I'm seeing this in a lot of my clients and also even in some of my interpersonal relationships. People unwilling to feel or engage deeply for lack of being hurt. So what we do is we create this wall around us that keeps that from happening so we don't take any risk. We don't want to risk the disappointment later. My major in college was journalism. I was going to be an anchor woman, if you can imagine that. But let me just say, in my internship, when I was in my early 20s, it only took me about 3 months to figure out that this was not my vocation. This is probably going to come as a huge shock to you, but I'm going to share this secret with you. The news is not an accurate depiction of what's going on in the world. See? I told you. And so I thought, oh my gosh, so in my aspiration to be able to share what's happening on the planet, I came to realize that what gets on the news is what sells. So this is not surprising to us, but in my little naive 21-year-old brain, it was a lot for me to digest. And so it's not really any different, quite frankly, than what's going on in your mind. Because just because you think it doesn't mean it's an accurate depiction of what's going on around you or with the people around you. So we kind of make stuff up, don't we? So you've got to give yourself and the people you love the gift of conscious attention, to be present with them in the moment. And I think you're going to watch your life unfold in really miraculous ways if you're willing to do that. With the exception of China and Japan, the U.S. is the only country traditionally that really aspires to multitasking. It's true. Because what we learn as multitaskers, it doesn't make us more productive, does it? It basically, in essence, just means that we are mediocre at everything. That's what happens. And so, in fact, when we start to think about it, Japan, for example, has what they call, it's a disease, if you will, that insurance companies pay out on. It's called karoshi. Are you familiar with that? Karoshi literally translates into death by overworking. Yeah, and insurance companies pay on it. It's so common. We have all the same maladies, we just don't call it that, right? So when we think about what's happening with our physical body, we have to recognize that that's what's happening. So remember, people, you have to be present to win, right? That's one of the first ones. So number two is to be content. Those of you who know a little bit about me know that I make my living from taking people from where they are to where they want to go. And it's a fabulous vocation. I'm really proud of the work that I do. But one of the things that I've started to notice is that I have a hard time sometimes getting out of self-improvement mode. Does anybody sympathize with that? So it's kind of interesting to me. It's kind of a unity malady for one thing, right? So that's part of it. And I'm a coach. So I was raised in unity and I'm a professional coach. So I'm kind of annoyingly transformative all the time. Ask my kid. She will tell you. She's like, don't coach me, Mom. I'm done. I don't even know that I'm doing it anymore. So I do a lot of work with several Unity churches, and I have one that I go to quite frequently up in the New England area. And so I got to be really close friends with a little gal named Katie. She's on the board there, and she is like the poster child for up-leveling your life. She's like a competition bodybuilder. She raised 3 kids by herself. She runs 4 businesses. She's not even real. I mean, she's amazing. But she's an amazing person. And I always leave there really inspired to do something really wonderful, which is part of, I think, why we really get along. But at the same time, I was talking to her on the phone before I headed up there last time. And she says to me, she said, so what do you want to do while you're here? She goes, you want to go to the gym with me? I was like, sure, let's do that. So I get off the phone and I'm thinking to myself, not really. I don't really want, I kid, but it's like I'm thinking I have 4 days in one of the most beautiful parts of the country. And I don't want to spend it inside of a building smelling sweat socks and facing the scale. I can do that when I get home. But for like a nanosecond, I actually felt really guilty about that. It's like, well, you should go to the gym. You need to go to the gym. But at this whole thing was going on, I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if it's even possible for us in this generation, or in any of our generations, this time on the planet. I wonder if it's possible for us to not be in self-improvement mode. Do we even know how to do that anymore? Do we? So I did something really scandalous on this trip. I decided that I would establish a goal. And my goal is that I was not going to, the whole 4 days I was there, I was not going to improve myself in any way. It's like, I'm not going to the gym. I'm not reading any Deepak Chopra. I might not even shower. I'm just kidding, I totally showered. But when I started thinking about it, it's like, you know what? I got nobody to save. I don't need to be productive during this session. So I decided to just stop and listen to myself, just to be still and let my body tell me what it wanted to eat. And just to have the car decide where it wants to turn. And just make some decisions. Think about really brainless, unimportant things like what kind of petroleum jelly they put in the bottom of boba tea. I don't know what that is. Or whether or not I like Khloe Kardashian as a blonde or a brunette. Any thoughts on that? What? I still can't decide. She looks great either way, right? So I'm thinking it's really, I just want to think about some really useless stuff. And so it's important to recognize that while it's our nature to expand and to grow, sometimes enhancing the human spirit comes when we quit trying to fix stuff. Ourselves and others, by the way. We don't have to fix everything. Because here's a newsflash for you. I'm here to remind you that you're not broken. You're not broken. And you know that at an inherent level, you know that you're complete. But we don't have time to do that. Contentment is kind of a dying art. So I'd like you to join me this week. I'm going to invite you to join me in doing, just today, absolutely nothing to improve yourself today. You can take the messages that you want to. Don't do anything with them today, okay? Eat chocolate if you want. Do whatever you want to do. This is all about just taking care of yourself for just a moment. There's sweet contentment that comes from just sitting still and being magnificent. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do today. Number 3, this is a no-brainer. Be grateful. Be grateful. You've all heard the old axiom, right? The having an attitude of gratitude. But one of the things that I've noticed, certainly in my coaching business, is that having an attitude of anything doesn't really change your life in any way. So I'm going to invite you into a practice of gratitude. Make it actionable. It's not just about having the attitude of gratitude. You have to actively practice this. So gratitude, I want you to make it something that you do, not just something that you feel. Now, feeling gratitude is really useful because when you feel gratitude, then it attracts more things to you to be grateful for, doesn't it? So that's useful, but it doesn't actually change your life experiences. So if you're wondering what it looks like to be in action with gratitude, all it really means is you're actively seeking out things to be grateful for. Remember the movie The Secret that came out a few years ago? Big scandal around the law of attraction. There was a gentleman in that movie by the name of Lee Brower. And Lee Brower is the one that kind of introduced to us the concept of the gratitude rock. Do you remember the gratitude rock? He literally put a rock in his pocket. And what he did is that every time he put his hand in his pocket and he felt the rock, it reminded him to stop, take a breath, and look around for something to be grateful for. That was it. That was the whole practice. But it did a couple of things for him. First and foremost is obviously it put him in the spirit of appreciation. But secondly, it caused him to be present. Because you have to be present to be in gratitude. So it did that for him. I have a gratitude rock that I put beside my bed. I don't always have a pocket. So I put it beside my bed. So every night when I go to bed, I grab my gratitude rock and I think of 10 things that I'm grateful for from that day. And I think that you'll find as you start to get into the practice of gratitude, even on your crappiest day, you can easily come up with 10 things. You'll be appreciative for things like heat in your home. And maybe a good conversation with somebody at the grocery store, right? Or just the smallest things. So being a practice of gratitude becomes an easy exercise when you know what you're looking for. All right. Number 4. Number 4 is be playful. Be playful. George Bernard Shaw has a quote that says, "We don't quit playing because we grow old. We grow old because we quit playing." We grow old because we quit playing. I was raised in a big Irish family with a bunch of brothers, and they were always playing gags on each other. So I was like, play was the norm in my household. I was also raised by teenage parents, if you will. My mom had all 4 of her kids by the time she was 22. Yeah, impressive, huh? And lived to tell about it. So, which was amazing. And so when I think back on my childhood home, it was probably a little bit unorthodox. So we had like blacklight posters and fishnet hanging from the ceiling. I mean, this was the 60s, okay? It's just what it looked like. And because they were so young, they didn't have any money. But there was so much play in our home. I honestly didn't know we were poor till I was in high school. I remember one Thanksgiving, we didn't have enough money for a turkey. So my mom bought, this was when hamburger was like 19 cents a pound or something like that. So my mother bought 3 pounds of hamburger, and she made a meatloaf, and she shaped it like a turkey. My dad sliced it sideways. It was funny. And it was not uncommon, by the way, that they didn't have the money to pay utilities. So we spent a lot of time without any lights in our house. And so my dad created this murder mystery game that we played with flashlights, and we thought it was hilarious. We thought, oh yeah, the lights are out, cool. Right? So we really didn't understand. So what I've learned, though, is that the more entitled we become, the less creative we are. We played as children, and my parents played when we were children because it was out of necessity. Now our entertainment is our technology, which is almost always a solo activity anyway. So we lose sight of the playfulness as we move through this. When I was younger, I still have a little point on the inside of my ear. And so my dad had this old truck. It was like a 1940s pickup truck. And what I didn't know about it at the time is that, it had a gear shift knob over here, a big old gear shift knob. And that if you kind of just tap the clutch just a little bit, it'll pop out of gear. But my father told me one time, he said, you know what? He told me I was a leprechaun. And he said, you know what? You have magic. All you have to do is really look really hard at this gear shift knob, and you can move that knob. And man, I concentrated so hard. I looked and looked. And I was just like getting a headache. I was trying so hard. And finally, he goes, just open your eyes and look at it. And I opened my eyes and looked at it, and it went boom, and that thing popped out. I was like, oh. Folks, I thought I was a leprechaun until I was 11 years old. We had a forsythia bush. You know what that is? The yellow bush? Right, my dad told me it was a forsythia bush and that he planted it there for me. And honestly, I was in middle school before I knew anybody else had a forsythia bush. I was like, how did you get one of those? It's like, I thought we were the only ones that had one. But it really just comes from just, looking at the day-to-day things and figuring out, how can this be more fun? In fact, anytime I interview a client, I ask them, particularly a corporate client, I ask them, what do you guys do for fun around here? I do. And if I was going on a job interview, I would ask the same thing. And if they look at me like I have a horn growing out of my forehead, that's not a match for me. So you have to know what is important to you. And if you're missing play in your life, it's important to recognize. In fact, I would argue that the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. Chronic depression has increased tenfold since 1989. 10 times more chronic depression. And there's a myriad of things that come into play as it relates to why that is. But the second highest rated item on the list of why people are depressed, lack of leisure or play. People aren't playing anymore. In fact, we've gotten to the point where our families are getting smaller, our houses are getting bigger. We don't bother our neighbors. We don't want them to bother us. We don't want to be bothered by them, or they don't want to be bothered by us. And so it really becomes to the point where we really don't have that connectedness anymore, which brings us to our number one reason cited for clinical depression: lack of connectedness to something bigger than ourselves. Could be spiritual in nature. Could be lack of community. Right? As we see the church as a building, more and more people are doing church from their home, aren't they? So we have to figure out how to create a sense of community that is compelling enough for people to want to come and be with us, because people are dying to connect. They just don't know it. We've got to figure out ways to do that. When I bought my house, I first moved into the house. It was in a little cul-de-sac, and I moved in next door to a really good friend of mine. So my daughter and I moved there when she was about 9 years old. And I asked my neighbor, I said, so tell me a little bit about the neighbors around you. And she said, well, I mean, I know their names, but I don't really know too much about them. She had lived there for 12 years. And that may be different in a community that's a little closer knit like it is here, but I would tell you, in the Kansas City area where I live, people just kind of keep to themselves, unless there's this a reason to connect, a celebration, an event, something like that. And so it was just surprising to me. I was like, how can you live somewhere for 12 years and not know the people who live 40 feet from you? I think that's insane. So there's, people are dying to connect. So the first thing we did is my daughter and I did what we call a driveway movie. Has anybody ever done that? Put a sheet on your garage door, and I brought my projector home from the office, and we projected Princess Bride on the garage door. And we went from door to door with a little flyer and said, hey, we're going to do a driveway movie, bring a lawn chair. We're going to have Raisinets and soda and beer or whatever you want. And so, did I say beer in church? I'm sorry. I meant soda. And but it was really fun. And you know what happened? We had representation from every single house in that cul-de-sac. People come out of their house with their lawn chairs. People are dying to talk to each other. Lack of connectedness to something bigger than ourselves. Which brings me to number 5. Number 5 is be trusting. Be trusting. Trust is built in the smallest of moments. In John Gottman's study on trust and betrayal, he calls these sliding door moments. And he's referring to the 1990s movie called Sliding Door with Gwyneth Paltrow. And if you're not familiar with the movie, I do a lot of movie references. If you're not familiar with that movie, in essence, what happens is it follows Gwyneth Paltrow through what would be seemingly unimportant moments in her life. At this place where she is getting ready to board a train. And at this point, the movie splits into 2 different storylines. In one storyline, she catches the train. In the other one, she does not. And it's just a series of all the things that happen because of that sliding door moment, and how her life actually, the ending of those stories were so radically different based on that one moment. We are never at a choiceless moment, are we? You're always deciding, what are you going to wear? What are you going to eat? Where are you going to turn? And so we have so many opportunities throughout the course of the day. You might see somebody looking lost or scared, and we avoid eye contact because we don't want to break our stride. Or maybe you see somebody on your caller ID and you think, you know what, I can't even take this call right now because they got a lot of stuff going on and I frankly don't have the energy for it. So you send them to voicemail. Well, we've all done that, right? And so the reason that we're talking about this is what Stephen Covey calls making deposits into relationship. Every day there's an opportunity to either build trust or to betray trust. This is the best definition of trust I've ever heard. I'm going to read this to you because I don't want to mess it up. Trust is choosing to make something that is important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Trust is choosing to make something that's important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. And being trustworthy is paramount to trusting others. Don't take on so much that you can't meet the commitments that you've made to people. I'm a bottom line kind of gal. I mean, I surround myself with people who say what they mean and mean what they say. Not just sometimes, but consistently. And once you start to create a pattern of consistency, then you start to build trust with other people. I found that we don't always get what we want from people, but we usually get what we expect, don't we? And so familiarity really does breed contempt. So we start to kind of pick at the people around us, even the people that we love the most. So is there anybody here in the room that would that could say that they could conceivably possibly have an annoying characteristic? Okay. So is there anybody here who is sitting next to someone that might say, perhaps you have more than one? That's what I thought. Okay. Look for the good in people, and they will show it to you. Won't they? Psychologists have a term called confirmation bias, which means we seek out evidence to support what we already believe. Right? Look for the good in people. They will show it to you. That's confirmation bias, baby. And beyond a doubt, the trust that plays the greatest role quite frankly, in handling life's daily challenges is what we call good old-fashioned faith. It's the knowing that I have no earthly idea how I'm going to get this done, but I know I will. It's the inherent knowing that you came to this planet with the resources you have, both physical and non-physical, to get you any place you need to go, to create the greatest desires that you have in your life. You have all of those things. You need to believe that extraordinary is possible. Know that you are loved. Believe that you're supported. And live like you are the divine, because that is exactly what you are. Thank you for letting me spend my morning with you. Namaste.